The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Lance Parker stepped into Tony's Pizza Palace, the worn brim of his baseball cap casting a shadow over eyes trained to see through illusions. He tightened his jacket against the cool air conditioning, his movements casual, deliberate. To the world, he was just another customer. But beneath the disguise, a pair of faded jeans, scuffed sneakers, and a wrinkled tee, was a man who once walked these very floors chasing a dream that had long since outgrown him. At 42, Lance Parker had built an empire. His name was whispered in boardrooms and etched into Forbes articles, but none of that mattered tonight. Tonight, he was a ghost of his former self, walking back through the doors of a life he thought he'd left behind. He scanned the pizzeria with the trained eyes of someone who had once lived for the grind, who knew the difference between a smile and a smirk, between effort and routine. This wasn't his first undercover visit. Over the past year, he'd quietly dropped in on dozens of his 43 restaurant locations, unannounced and unnoticed, to see the truth behind the polished reports and curated numbers. Some nights had ended in pride, others in bitter disappointment. Tonight, downtown Sacramento was on the map. The scent of garlic and oregano clung to the air like memory. Families filled the red vinyl booths, laughter and arguments blending into a hum of life. College students hunched over textbooks, sipping cheap sodas as they crammed for tests. In the corner, a group of teenagers argued about toppings with the kind of passion that only youth could afford. It was comforting, real. The walls were lined with sepia-toned photos from 1987, back when Tony's was just a failing hole in the wall with peeling paint and too much debt. Back when Lance had poured every dollar he had, and every hour he didn't, into resurrecting it. This place wasn't just part of his chain. It was where it all began. He stepped into line behind a young mother wrangling 2 toddlers. They giggled and tugged at her sleeve while she tried to place her order, apologizing between each sentence. Lance smiled faintly, remembering how once upon a time he'd delivered pizzas to women just like her. Back then he was broke, exhausted, but oddly hopeful. As he stood there, pretending to scroll through messages on his phone, his focus shifted. Not to texts, but to the efficiency behind the counter. The cashier worked with ease, multitasking with genuine warmth. She smiled like she meant it. That was rare and valuable. "Next in line, please." The voice drew his gaze upward, and in an instant, something shifted. She stood there, poised, professional, and oddly familiar. Her name tag read Emma. She had warm hazel eyes, hair tied back in a tidy ponytail, and the kind of calm that only comes from years of handling chaos. There was a gravity to her presence, something that pulled at his memory like a thread he couldn't quite place. "What can I get started for you tonight?" she asked, fingers poised over the register. Lance hesitated, masking the strange flicker of recognition rising in his chest. "Just a large pepperoni. For pickup." "Absolutely. Will that be everything?" "Yeah, that's it." He handed her a credit card linked to a pseudonym, something he used for all his undercover trips. The illusion needed to be complete. "It'll be about 15 minutes, she said, printing the receipt. "Feel free to sit anywhere or wait by the window." He nodded and chose a booth near the kitchen, the perfect vantage point. From there, he could see everything. The way the dough was stretched, the sauce ladled, the rhythm of the oven. This team was dialed in. He made a mental note to commend whoever managed this location. 15 minutes passed quickly, but he barely noticed the time. He was too immersed in thought, too lost in the comforting hum of a well-run operation. Then Emma reappeared, holding a white pizza box in both hands. "Large pepperoni for Lance?" "That's me." He stood, reaching for his wallet to tip her. "No need," she said with a genuine smile. "But thank you. I hope you enjoy it." Her kindness lingered like warmth in a room after the fire's gone out. Lance thanked her and made his way toward the door, his mind already crafting the positive report he'd deliver to upper management. The service had been stellar, the food prompt, the vibe inviting. Everything was exactly as it should be. But then something made him stop. 3 steps from the door, to be exact. He glanced down at the box out of habit, checking for proper branding. But what he saw hit him like a memory carved into time. In the upper right corner of the white cardboard box, in black Sharpie marker, was a signature. Not just any signature, his signature. The exact looping LP, followed by the tiny 5-pointed star he used to draw when he was 22. It was the way he signed every pizza box back when he worked at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria. When he was young, idealistic, and convinced the world might someday remember his name. The lines were identical. The flourish on the P, the whimsical star. It was impossible, but there it was. Lance stood frozen, heart thudding against his rib cage. Not from fear, but from something far deeper, something ancient and buried. The past had just knocked on his door in the most unexpected way. Lance's pulse thundered in his chest as the weight of the past pressed in. That familiar signature, sharp and deliberate, wasn't just a mark, it was a time capsule. Suddenly, he was no longer a CEO in disguise, but a 22-year-old kid racing through quiet suburbs in a battered Honda Civic, trying to keep pizza boxes from sliding off the passenger seat. He remembered every detail of that summer job, how he'd worked double shifts, soaked in sweat and ambition, praying his car wouldn't die before graduation. He could almost hear the rustling of receipts in his glove box, smell the lingering scent of marinara in his clothes. His manager back then insisted every driver sign the boxes. It made the experience more personal. Lance had gone further, adding a star to his initials, trying to leave a little magic with each delivery. He wanted to be remembered. And for a while, he thought that star might be the only thing anyone would recall about him. But this wasn't Mamma Mia's. That chain had folded 15 years ago, and no one had ever copied his signature. It was too specific, too personal. It had been his private flourish, a silent whisper of identity in a job built on anonymity. Seeing it again now, so perfectly replicated, sent a ripple of confusion and something bordering on fear through him. The edges of the world blurred as his mind raced. Who could have known? Who would have cared enough to remember? The noise of the bustling restaurant, the laughter, the clink of plates, the whir of the ovens, faded into a distant hum as he stared down at the box in disbelief. Was this some elaborate prank? A coincidence too strange to explain? Or worse, had someone recognized him despite his efforts to remain invisible? He turned his gaze slowly back toward the counter, toward the woman named Emma. She was helping another customer, focused and calm, but there was something about her posture, the tilt of her head, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. It stirred something deep in his memory, soft, unspoken, almost painful. Then she looked up, their eyes locked, and the air in the room shifted. Her polite smile faltered, and for a breathless second, she seemed just as stunned as he was. Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes. First surprise, then uncertainty, and finally, the fragile shimmer of memory rising to the surface. It was as if both of them had been unknowingly carrying the same old story, tucked away in different corners of time, only now stumbling back into it. Lance couldn't move. His legs might as well have been made of stone. His mind, though, was spinning, pulling fragments of the past from where they'd been buried. Fluorescent office lights, stale coffee, shared ambition, long nights chasing impossible deadlines, and her, Emma. She said something to her co-worker, a teenage boy with a headset, and stepped away from the register. Her movements were steady, but her eyes betrayed the storm within. As she walked around the counter, weaving through the crowded tables, Lance took in the details he hadn't noticed before. The faint scar above her brow, the way her lips pressed together when she was nervous, the quiet grace in her walk, even in stiff work shoes. "Excuse me," she said gently, stopping in front of him. Her voice was lower now, intimate. "I'm sorry, but are you Lance?" Lance Parker? The sound of his name in her voice struck like a lightning bolt. Years dissolved. He wasn't the powerful executive anymore. He was 23, fresh out of college, sitting beside her in that claustrophobic break room at Pinnacle Marketing, laughing over vending machine snacks and survival strategies. Emma, he breathed, the name falling from his lips without thought. Emma Rodriguez. Her face lit up, not with forced politeness, but with something real. It was the first true smile he'd seen on her all night. I thought it might be you, but I wasn't sure. You look, she paused, her eyes sweeping over his undercover getup. Different. Lance chuckled, though emotion thickened his voice. Yeah, this isn't exactly my typical wardrobe. He held up the pizza box, the signature still burning into his mind. Emma, how did you... Why's my signature on this box? Her smile faded, replaced by something softer. I remember everything about that summer, she said quietly, eyes flickering downward. You used to tell me about your delivery job when we'd sneak off during lunch breaks. You were so proud of that little star. You said it made the pizza feel less like a product and more like a gift. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't look away. I never forgot. Lance's throat tightened. Emma drew a breath. I used to practice your signature. Back then, I mean. During those endless meetings when I should have been taking notes, I'd doodle it in the margins of my binder. I guess part of me thought, if I could write like you, maybe I could be like you. You had this presence, this belief that you could fix anything. I wanted to believe that about myself. Lance felt the confession like a blow to the chest. She had always been brilliant, one of the smartest, most dedicated people in the company. But he remembered how she'd shrink under pressure, how her voice would tremble even when her ideas were spot on. She never saw what everyone else saw in her. You were confident, Emma, he said softly. You were the most capable person in that entire office. She shook her head with a sad smile. That's not how I felt. But you had this light. It made people feel like they could do more, be more. She looked around the restaurant, then back at him. I never stopped signing pizza boxes like that. It started as a silly tribute, but then it just became part of how I worked, a way of remembering the version of myself who once believed she could be brave. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant continued around them. Orders shouted, ovens buzzed, kids laughed. But Lance felt like he'd been dropped into a dream. The box in his hands was no longer just cardboard. It was a bridge to a version of himself he'd nearly forgotten. And standing before him was the woman who had kept that bridge alive. It was a moment Lance never expected, standing in the heart of a restaurant he secretly owned, holding a pizza box that bore his forgotten mark, staring into the eyes of a woman who had once shared his most uncertain years. Emma had reappeared in his life not as a memory, but as flesh and bone, carrying echoes of a story that had clearly never ended for either of them. Her words stayed with him like an echo down a long hallway. I thought maybe if I could write like you, I could be as confident as you seemed. He felt a strange cocktail of emotions stir within him. Flattery, confusion, shame. But deeper than all that was something he couldn't quite name. It was a feeling not of nostalgia, but of missed opportunities, like standing in front of a door he hadn't realized he'd closed decades ago. Emma, he said slowly, what are you doing here, at my restaurant? The question caught her off guard. Your restaurant? I own Tony's Pizza Palace, he admitted quietly. Her face shifted, first surprise, then an unmistakable flush of embarrassment. The whole chain? He nodded. Oh, God, she muttered, rubbing her forehead. You're that owner, doing those mysterious undercover evaluations. Janet mentioned something about corporate coming around secretly, but I never imagined... She trailed off, eyes wide with disbelief. I can't believe I just served pizza to my former co-worker who now turns out to be... What? My boss's boss's boss? She let out a short, self-conscious laugh, one that tried to hide discomfort behind humor. This is beyond mortifying. Lance stepped forward, lowering his voice. Hey, this isn't what it looks like. I had no idea you worked here. This is as unexpected for me as it is for you. His words softened her gaze, but a wall had gone up. He could see it. She looked away, retreating just slightly behind it. After Pinnacle, he said carefully, we lost touch. I've thought about you, Emma. I always wondered what happened. Her eyes sharpened slightly. She hesitated. Life happened, Lance. Things got complicated. What kind of complicated? Emma glanced around the bustling restaurant. Her discomfort was clear, but she wasn't retreating. Not completely. Look, my shift ends in about an hour. There's a coffee shop just down the street, Grindhouse. It stays open late. If you want to talk, really talk, meet me there. Lance didn't even pause. Yes, absolutely. She nodded and turned back toward the counter. But just before disappearing into the sea of customers, she looked over her shoulder. For what it's worth, she said softly, I'm glad to see you again, even under these weird circumstances. And then she was gone. Lance stood still, pizza box forgotten in his hands, as the magnitude of what had just unfolded sank in. He had come here expecting a routine inspection, but instead, he'd stumbled into a forgotten chapter of his life, a chapter he hadn't realized was still being written. One thing was certain, he wouldn't be eating pizza tonight. He had too many questions that needed answers. Grindhouse. Coffee smelled like memory, like warm beans and worn wood, like creative chaos and conversations that stretched past midnight. Mismatched chairs crowded around low tables. Local art adorned the walls, all slightly crooked. It was the kind of place Lance would have adored in his 20s, back when life felt urgent and endless. Now, seated across from Emma in a quiet corner booth, with 2 mugs of steaming coffee between them, it felt like stepping into a museum of the life he might have had. Emma had changed into jeans and a soft gray sweater that hung gently off one shoulder, making her look years younger. Or maybe it just made her look like herself. The woman he remembered, not the employee, but the person. She held her coffee close, fingers curled around the warmth like it was a shield. So, Lance said gently, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. How did you end up at Tony's? Emma's smile was tinged with irony. That's quite a story. She took a slow sip before continuing. After Pinnacle collapsed, everything fell apart. I tried to stay in the game, bounced between marketing agencies, corporate gigs, even did some freelance consulting, but nothing really stuck. Lance nodded slowly, the puzzle of her absence starting to come together. Emma looked out the window, her expression distant. I kept thinking about something you used to say, that the service industry teaches you more about people in 6 months than business school does in 4 years. He chuckled softly. I said that. You did, more than once. She smiled at the memory. So I went back. Started waiting tables at a little family diner in Portland. Thought it would be temporary, but I was good at it. Not just the tasks, the customer service, the food, but the people part. Building teams, making things work. It felt honest, more honest than marketing ever did. And Portland's a long way from here, he said. I moved to Sacramento 3 years ago, she replied. Tony's was expanding, had a reputation for treating staff decently. The pay's not amazing, but the benefits are good. And there's room to grow. She paused. Your company has a good reputation, Lance. People talk about it like it's one of the few places that actually cares. He felt a swell of pride, but it quickly twisted into something more complicated. Emma, you were brilliant at Pinnacle, he said softly. You had that breakthrough presentation on consumer behavior. Everyone was talking about it. What happened to that path? Her eyes darkened. She looked down at her coffee for a long moment. You really don't remember how things ended? Lance felt a tightening in his chest. I remember we were working on the Morrison account. Long hours, stress, then you were just gone. HR said you'd resigned. I tried calling, but your number was disconnected." Emma met his eyes then, and what he saw, there wasn't anger. It was something heavier, older. "You were so focused on climbing that ladder," she said quietly. "You missed everything else that was happening." Lance felt the words like ice water on skin. "What are you talking about?" Emma was silent for a long time, long enough that he almost thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but flat, like she'd rehearsed it in her mind too many times. "Do you remember Richard Blackwood?" The name hit like a hammer. Richard, the senior partner, Emma's direct supervisor, Lance's mentor, the man who'd pushed Lance into his first major promotion. "Of course," Lance said warily. "What about him?" Emma looked him squarely in the eye. "He was harassing me, Lance, for months. It started small, comments about my appearance, jokes during meetings. Then, touching, always just enough to seem accidental, but it wasn't." Lance's stomach dropped. His world shifted under him. "I reported it," she continued. "HR promised to investigate. Nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. Richard just got more careful." "Oh my God." "Emma, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," she said. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes told a story of betrayal. "Remember that night we stayed late working on the Morrison pitch? I started to tell you. I said I needed to talk, but you—" She swallowed. "You cut me off. Said we had to stay focused. That this pitch was our chance to prove ourselves. You said personal drama could wait." The memory hit Lance like a physical blow. Emma, eyes wide, voice tight, trying to speak. And him, blind with ambition, brushing her off, trying to impress Richard of all people. He had missed it. All of it. And now, he would have to face what that meant. Lance sat in stunned silence, staring at the woman across from him, her face calm, but her eyes ablaze with truths he hadn't dared to face until now. The cafe around them had grown still, the air thick with a silence so raw, it hummed louder than any noise. He pressed a trembling hand against his temple, as if that might slow the flood of memories surging through him. All at once, he saw it. The missed signs, the late nights when she tried to speak, the way she'd started shrinking into herself while he celebrated every nod of approval from Richard Blackwood, the man who'd turned out to be a predator in a tailored suit. "Oh God," he whispered, almost to himself. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I was such an idiot." Emma's voice was measured, not cruel, but unflinching. "You weren't an idiot, Lance. You were 23rd, hungry, blinded by ambition. But let's be honest. Richard was your mentor. He was grooming you for the fast track, giving you every opportunity you thought you had to earn." She let the weight of her words settle between them. "Even if I had told you everything, would you have believed me?" Lance wanted to say yes. He wanted to be the man who would have stood by her, but the truth was uglier. Back then, Richard had represented everything Lance wanted to be: powerful, respected, unstoppable. Believing that such a man could be capable of such manipulation would have shattered everything Lance built his identity around. "I don't know," he said, voice hoarse with shame. "I don't know if I would have believed you, and that's the worst part." Emma nodded slowly, her gaze steady. "What happened?" Lance asked, softer now, as if afraid the truth might burn. "I started documenting everything, conversations, incidents, anything I could prove. When I finally had enough, I brought it to the partners." Her laugh was bitter, dry. "They thanked me by offering Richard an early retirement, with full honors and a golden parachute pension. Then they handed me a non-disclosure agreement and said signing it would be best for everyone." "You refused," Lance said, already knowing the answer. "I refused. And they punished you for it." Emma looked him dead in the eye. "They made it unbearable. Microaggressions, exclusions, my projects reassigned. It was death by 1,000 cuts. I held on as long as I could, but eventually I walked out." Lance felt a sickness clawing at his stomach. She continued. On my last day, Richard came to my desk, leaned in close and told me I'd never work in marketing again, that he had friends in every corner of the industry, and I'd be blacklisted before I even finished cleaning out my inbox. He stared at her, mouth dry. Emma, while I was celebrating, you were being destroyed. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. That made it hurt more. I'm sorry, he whispered again. If I had just listened. But you didn't want to listen, Lance, she interrupted, softly but firmly. That's what hurt the most. The cafe had thinned out now, the low hum of conversation fading until it felt like the two of them were alone inside a memory, inside a wound that had never fully healed. Lance took a deep breath, ran his fingers through his hair, disrupting what was left of his disguise. You're right, he said finally, voice heavy. I didn't want to know. I was so obsessed with proving myself, I tuned out everything that didn't serve that goal, including you. Emma's lips pressed into a line, but she nodded once. Not in forgiveness, just in recognition. What happened to Richard after you left? Nothing, she said simply. That single word held more bitterness than a lifetime of resentment. He stayed for another 10 years, became senior partner, retired with a pension most people couldn't earn in 5 lifetimes. And the NDA? I never signed it, she said. Didn't matter. Richard's network did the job for him. Word got around. Quiet rumors that I was difficult, unstable, not a team player. Recruiters stopped calling back. HR managers gave me polite rejections that smelled like something rotten underneath. Lance leaned forward, desperate to piece together what he had missed, what he had enabled. But you could have. There had to be other firms, other cities. Lance, she said, stopping him gently. You still don't get it. When someone like Richard wants to erase you, geography doesn't matter. Industry doesn't matter. I had HR reps ask me if I was the type to see problems where none existed. Her voice didn't rise, but the power in it was undeniable. While Lance had built his legacy brick by gilded brick, powered by Richard's introductions, Richard's investors, Richard's blessing, Emma had been scraping her way through a career that rejected her before she even stepped in the door. And then Lance said what he had feared to admit even to himself. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice barely more than a breath. After you left, Richard leaned in even harder, invited me to private dinners, golf weekends, connected me to capital, investors. By the time I started my first company, he was one of my key backers. He forced himself to meet her gaze. Everything I've built, Emma, it's because of him. My entire career rests on the foundation of the man who dismantled yours. She didn't react at first, but Lance saw her hands curl slightly tighter around the mug, saw the way her jaw set. Does that make you feel guilty? She asked after a long pause. Yes, he said, the word ripping from his chest. God, yes. I've spent 20 years telling myself I was self-made, that I earned every win. But the truth is, I was chosen. He swallowed the bitter taste of it. I was chosen because I was convenient, because I didn't ask hard questions, because I didn't look too closely. Emma tilted her head, her eyes narrowing with a kind of clarity that cut through every excuse. Did you ever wonder, she asked, why he chose you? Lance blinked. He had wondered, hadn't he? Even back then, part of him knew it didn't add up. Why would a senior partner with dozens of protégés pick a no-name associate from Ohio with no connections? I thought I was special, he said with a humorless laugh. I thought he saw potential. Oh, he did, Emma said. Just not the kind you imagined. She leaned in slightly, and her voice dropped. Razor sharp now. Do you remember the Hartwell Industries presentation? Lance nodded, suddenly nauseous. You found the error in their financial projections. Emma's eyes didn't blink, and Richard presented it as his own. Took credit in that boardroom, smiled as they praised him. You were sitting right there. Lance remembered the weight in his chest, the split-second decision not to speak, because speaking would have meant choosing a side. I told him I wanted recognition, she continued. He told me junior associates didn't get credit for senior-level insight, that if I had a problem with the way the real world worked, maybe I wasn't cut out for business. Lance shut his eyes, guilt pouring through him like ice. Emma, No, she said. You did have an idea. You knew. You were there. You watched him take what I'd done and claim it as his, and you said nothing. He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came, because she was right. I stayed silent because I was scared, he said, because I didn't want to lose everything I thought I was working toward. Emma exhaled deeply, her voice colder now, but heartbreakingly calm. He chose you because he knew you wouldn't rock the boat. You were ambitious enough to be useful, but not principled enough to be dangerous. You were the perfect protege for a man who built his career on taking credit for other people's brilliance and silencing those who dared challenge him. Lance bowed his head. For the first time in decades, he felt truly, utterly seen, and it broke something open inside him. Lance felt like he was drowning in 20 years of willful blindness. Every accolade he'd ever earned, every title, every glowing article and keynote speech, it all tasted like ash now, corrupted by the truth he could no longer ignore. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick and raw. Emma, I'm so incredibly sorry. For not listening, for not standing up for you, for letting myself benefit from a system that crushed you. He knew the words were hollow compared to the damage done, but still, they needed to be said. Emma studied him for a long time, and though her expression didn't soften into forgiveness, Lance thought he saw the smallest shift, something more valuable: acknowledgement. The question isn't whether you can make it right, Lance, she said softly. The question is, what are you going to do now that you finally know the truth? Her words landed with the weight of a verdict. Not cruel, not vindictive, just real. Lance looked at her and saw more than just a former colleague or someone from his past. He saw the friend whose brilliance had once matched his ambition, the woman who had believed in people even after being failed by them. And he saw himself, the man who once could have loved her but didn't have the courage to admit it. I need to tell you something, he said, voice trembling with the weight of long-buried truth. Something I've never said out loud, not even to myself. He swallowed hard. Back then, I was falling in love with you. Emma blinked, startled, but didn't interrupt. Those late nights at Pinnacle, he continued, eating vending machine food, chasing deadlines, talking about dreams. I didn't realize it until much later, but they were the best part of my life, and I let it all go because I was afraid. Afraid that acknowledging how I felt might complicate my climb, that it might make me look weak in front of Richard or ruin everything I was building. He shook his head, ashamed. And when you tried to tell me about what Richard was doing, I didn't just fail you. I chose not to see you, because I was too scared of what standing beside you might cost me. Emma was silent, her expression unreadable. I thought I was being practical, Lance said. I told myself I'd come back for you once I made it, that I could sweep you off your feet with all my success. But I didn't understand back then that every compromise I made changed me, that the man who became powerful enough to deserve you wasn't the man you once cared about. His voice cracked. I lost myself trying to become someone worthy of love, and ended up becoming someone incapable of it. Emma's hand moved across the table, brushing against his briefly before pulling back. Lance, she said gently, you think you were the only one who had feelings back then? Lance's eyes widened. I cared about you too, she admitted. You were brilliant and passionate, and you made me feel like anything was possible. But I saw what you wanted more than anything: success, status, power. And I knew that Richard was your way to get it. Her voice wavered but didn't break. I never expected you to choose me over your dreams, but I didn't expect you to choose Richard over basic human decency. The words struck like a blow, but they were true. I failed you, Lance whispered, in every way that mattered. Yes, she said, you did. There was no venom in her voice, just truth. But do you know what hurt the most? She asked. It wasn't that you chose your career over me. It was that you chose your ambition over your own values. The man I cared about would have stood up for what was right. You're right, Lance said. That man died at Pinnacle, and I let Richard finish him. He wiped his eyes, no longer bothering to hide his tears. I built an empire, but lost my soul doing it. I have 43 restaurants and a net worth most people would envy. But I eat alone almost every night, because I forgot how to talk to people without calculating what they can do for me. Emma's voice softened but stayed firm. Is that why you do these undercover visits? To feel like a person again? Lance exhaled slowly. I tell myself it's about quality control. But maybe, yeah, for a few hours, I get to be someone real again. Someone who doesn't wear success like armor. For a moment, Emma didn't respond. Then her voice sharpened. Here's what I think. You're sitting here telling me about your pain because you want me to feel sorry for you. You want me to forgive you and wipe the slate clean. Lance opened his mouth, but she cut him off. Your loneliness isn't a tragedy, she said. It's a consequence. Her eyes locked onto his. You didn't just stumble into becoming someone who values profit over people. You chose that, again and again. Lance recoiled as if slapped. And maybe, in a way, he had been. You've had decades, Emma continued, and more money and power than most people dream of. You could have helped people like me. You could have investigated Richard, supported victims, changed the game. She leaned in. But instead, you built a bigger monument to yourself and called it redemption. Lance sat in silence, stripped bare by her words. The coffee shop was nearly empty now, and the overhead lights exposed every crack in the image he'd spent years curating. You're right, he said quietly. I had every chance. I could have helped, and I didn't. I chose to protect my comfort instead of using my power to do good. Emma's gaze finally softened. So, what now? Lance stared at his hands, realizing how soft they were. Hands that hadn't known real labor in years. I don't know. Emma tilted her head. That's a start. Is it? He asked, surprised by her calm. It is, she said. The Lance I knew at Pinnacle always had a plan, always had an answer. But maybe, not knowing is the first honest thing you've said all night. For the first time in years, Lance felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Not the naive kind, but a quiet sense that maybe the story wasn't over yet. Emma, he said slowly, can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest. Haven't I been honest enough for one night? She teased, and he managed a soft smile. Fair, he said. But this is important. Do you think I can really change? Not just perform change, but become someone different? Emma was quiet, tracing invisible patterns on the table. You're asking the wrong question. What do you mean? You keep asking if you can change, she said. As if change is something that happens to you, but change isn't a fate. It's a decision, one you make every day. She met his eyes. The question isn't, can you change? It's, will you? And something inside him shifted. What would that even look like? He asked. That's not for me to answer, she said, standing and gathering her bag. But if you're serious, it starts with action, not intentions. Make things right for the people you can still help, not because it'll make you feel better, but because it's what should have been done all along. Wait, Lance said, rising. Emma, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but will you let me help you? Not as an apology, just as something I should have done 20 years ago. She paused. What kind of help? I don't know, he said honestly. A new job, a letter of reference, money for school, or nothing, whatever you want. Not to fix the past, but to give you the future you deserved. And if I say no, then I'll respect that, he said, and I'll find other ways to do better, because it's not about me anymore. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then slowly, she sat back down. Okay, she said. I'll think about it. But Lance, if you want to be different, Don't start with me. Start with the people who still need someone to show up. He nodded, overwhelmed. I've already got ideas. Policy reform, advocacy partnerships, a foundation for workplace equity. Not just words, work. Emma's eyes lit with the same fierce light he remembered from late nights long ago. Then maybe we have something to talk about after all. She turned to leave, but Lance called after her. Emma, thank you for not letting me off easy, for still being the person I remember. She paused at the door, turning back with a small smile. For what it's worth, she said. I think the person you were might still be in there. You just have to decide if he's worth finding again. And then she was gone. Lance sat in the quiet of the cafe, the empty seat across from him still warm. He looked down at the pizza box beside him, the old signature, still perfectly intact in the corner. Tomorrow, he would start making calls to lawyers, advocates, HR experts, not as the CEO, but as a man who finally understood the cost of silence. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, he felt like the man Emma once believed he could be. That signature wasn't just a relic. It was a promise. A signature he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn.